Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Vince is my co-pilot, and we'll be discussing an article in the Washington Post called "The Less College Students Sleep, the Worse Their Grades Are." A question from a listener comes from Yuen in California, and she's seeking advice for parents about how to handle the difficulty of waiting on your student's decision. So Lisa will be our expert who will answer that question for us. And we have a brand new interview, and it's with Alison Merzel, a former grad school admission officer for 15 years at Ohio State, currently a private college coach in Ohio, and Alison will be helping us to understand the challenges Jewish students face on college campuses, how to know if a college is a safe space for Jewish students, and how to support Jewish students. And this will be part 1 of 3. And our college spotlight, Lisa recently visited UNC Wilmington, and she will be helping us to understand another underrated gem, part 1 of 2. Good morning, Vince. You're being a trooper today, man, coming off sickness and braving the elements.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and it's always a pleasure because, every week I make my time to listen to the podcast. So if I can join the podcast and add some wisdom, it's a pleasure.
Well, that's a good segue because it's tip time. And Vince and I each have a tip for you. They're both related to college list building. Why don't you share yours and I'll share mine?
Great. Well, my tip, as I'm working with juniors and occasionally some sophomores, we do this as we begin to build lists. I think it's really important that you when you share the list, that you share the information with parents, but also to really encourage the parents and maybe have a conversation. Sometimes I'll make a separate call and encourage the parents to click on the financial aid calculators, because what we're really trying to do is shape the education, not only of the student that you're working with, but with the parents and their understanding of what college costs. And it's interesting because I will have parents shoot out numbers, and they're usually $20,000 to $30,000 under what it actually costs.
Get ready for like a cardiac when people first find out, unless, obviously there's extremes, right? There's people that they know they're not going to qualify. They don't even plan on applying. That's one group. But if it's somebody who's not expecting to pay sticker, they're shocked at the percentage of your discretionary money that colleges expect, or even with the gapping. So, yeah. So, no, the cost calculator, running those cost calculators is really important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because, sometimes it's like, look, the way I like to approach it is you're looking for financial fit, emotional fit, social fit, academic fit. So if it's not going to work right from the start, like we have to even have that conversation whether this school should even be on the list. Because It's very painful to go all the way through the process and get in. Now, we have to be careful because most schools, not all, but most schools give merit-based financial aid. But there's that group that don't. And so for that group that doesn't give merit-based financial aid, like those numbers are pretty close to being the numbers, if not exactly the numbers. And so those are the times when, because there's another group of person, I don't want to freak out by them seeing a 75 sticker, and you and I know about most people get 25, 30 off the top.
Right.
Yeah. Good stuff. So my tip is also related to list building, and I've been reworking and rethinking this question that we get all the time, which is how many schools should be on my list, right? How many, we don't go a month without that question, right? And I haven't changed my overall view that there's no exact number, and it depends on the person, it depends on the circumstances, and there's a lot of factors to take into consideration. Everything from when you start to how organized you are to how competitive your programs are. My biggest thing is just making sure it's balanced. So that's my overall view, and I still stand by that. But this is a new twist I'm putting on it. Once you get 3 likelies, and people use different names, some people call them probables. Vince and I, we know there's the nomenclature game out there. It was like 50 different names for all these different categories, right? But we're talking about schools that there's a high probability that your child will be admitted at. This is my new perspective. Your list is not complete until you have found 3 likelies that you would be content and willing to go to.
Yes.
Because once you find 3 likelies, you're good. Like, you may have 3 likelies and decide, okay, you're going to take a shot at 10 reaches or targets or mid ranges or match schools. There's a zillion names out there for that too. Possibles. But, I personally don't like to see people get a lot more bad news than good news, because I want this process to be confidence enhancing, not confidence debilitating. So I'm not saying just get 3 likelies and then just take a shot at 15 schools. Like, I personally wouldn't recommend somebody just has 3 likelies, 15 reach schools. But once you get 3 you're happy to go with, you're in just a really good place. But the key is happy to go with, because most people just put them on the list and they have no intention of going. They think they'll never ever need them. So they just do it to keep us happy, or keep a parent happy, or a school counselor happy. So they do it, but they're like, yeah, I'll do it, but I'm not going there. No, I'm talking about, I want you to find 3 you're happy to go to. Once you're there, then your list is in a good place. That's kind of my new thing. It doesn't contradict all my old advice, but it's an addition to. What are your thoughts, Vince?
I think that's very wise. And in fact, I'm going to up my game with this class and make sure it's there, because I had, recently I had a family and the parents were like, we trust the school to come up with, the likely and 50-50. So, but we want to use you to help us get into the, the reaches and the far reaches.
Sure.
And I said, my job is to make sure that everything is on your list you're excited about going to.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes I get so focused on, how can we make the hardest options happen, that I don't really press the students to figure out why is LMU on your list? Why is Chapman on your list, or whatever the likely is?
Sure. Yeah. And it's actually really important, because you may end up there. And the other thing is, increasingly, especially with private schools, I see more and more of the schools doing the predictive modeling and doing the engagement scoring and all of that stuff, and not admitting people they don't think are going to come, and using incredibly sophisticated ways of making those projections. So the reason I bring that up is it's hard to count on a school that your profile is stronger than the average admit and just say, okay, I got that in the bag, so why would I even need 3? That's part of it, but I'm also talking about the embracing aspect of it too.
Yeah.
So because in the past, some people might have said, well, 2's fine. No, I don't really like 2 anymore. Unless it's at, what I would consider, I differentiate likelies and safety. A safety would be a school that admits by the numbers and you have the numbers. So if you have the numbers and admits by the numbers and you're in, okay, that's a little different. Maybe you don't need 3, but there's a lot of schools that don't do that, especially if they're holistic, and they can factor, likely to enroll or any of those factors into their, who they admit, or, who they wait list.
Right. Well, I like the term embrace, because it's like dating, somebody you marry. You're not going to say, did you go out on 3 dates and it was okay? Yeah, they'd be okay to marry for 25, for the rest of your life. That's not how you should look at it. This is something that you want to be excited about going to and nurture a relationship that's probably going to be a lifetime relationship with that school.
No, I feel really strongly about this. We had a listener send in a tip that's on this same general vicinity, slightly different, that I'm holding off, and I'll be sharing in the next couple of weeks as well, a Connecticut listener. But I don't see people do this. I don't see them. I see them very, very upset if they end up having to go to a likely. So there's just taken for granted, that tells me that likely in the minds of a lot of people is not really where I'm going to be. It's on
Yeah.
here, but I'm not going to end up landing there. And I'm not saying you will, but you might. And I'm also saying respect the competition because, think about it. Ideally, technically, a reach is a school that your statistical odds are less than 50% that you'll get in, right? Like the average kid is slightly stronger than your profile. And if you're talking about targets and mid ranges, average person looks like you, but you don't know what the institutional priorities are of the school in any given year. So those can't be counted on. So anyway, I could go on our whole time about this, but so this is a slightly different version. It's a little twist to admissions vernacular. I wouldn't call this like some, unique lingo. It's just a common thing that admission officers will often say when talking about an application. And I'll throw it out, Vince, and see what this means to you. This is the term missed opportunity. Missed opportunity. What does that mean to you as a file reader looking at an application and you say missed opportunity?
I think a missed opportunity is an opportunity that the applicant didn't say something or write something or provide information in their application process that could have made a difference.
Anything come to mind?
Oh, yeah. Like, did you show up at the high school visit?
Yeah, there you go. Missed opportunity.
If the school came and you weren't there and you didn't communicate afterwards or before that you couldn't be there. Another big missed opportunity is when, for at least from my standpoint, because of the students that I work with, they often are once they get into the process, they can sort of forget about what they're majoring in, and if they just say business but they offer only econ, that is a big missed opportunity.
No, I mean, the more I think about it, man, the pistons are firing in my head. Like, there's a lot of these, right? It's the person that does the personal statement, but there's no reflection, or they just make grandpa the hero, or their gym teacher or somebody's the hero. It's not signing up for an interview and there's an interview opportunity, and that's oftentimes a test of interest, or the essay says optional and you don't do it. Or it's something Susan talked about last week, which is how often you're reading a file and there's a major unanswered question that's driving you crazy that the student didn't choose to address. Like, why did you go from straight A's to 2 C's in the semester? Like, I know there's a reason.
Yes.
And you're not providing it for me. Missed opportunity. So, there's just so many of them. It's saying you're interested in a major that doesn't fit anything else in the application at all. Like, it doesn't match your curriculum, doesn't match your grades, your scores. There's no clubs, there's no recs, there's no substantiation at all. So it's just, we could go on and on. We could do a whole podcast on this, but it's just a common term I'll hear admission officers use when interacting, and missed opportunity. And it can also be in the essay. Sometimes it's just that same old predictable pattern that you get a lot, like maybe the athletic injury, and it's so predictable. Or you can read it and it's like, okay, I know where this is going before it even finishes up. You were on the bench and now you came in and got the winning goal. And it's just, it can be predictable essays that are so overly used, overly common, that you didn't really give an opportunity to highlight anything unique about yourself.
Right. And, one missed opportunity that was surprising to me, and I'm starting to see more action on this, is it in the portal. So I had a student who had applied to Babson, got an interview request in the portal. So not even an email. So if you weren't looking at your portal, you would never have known it was there.
Yes.
He opened that portal, saw that there was a day left. He emailed it immediately. The next day they interviewed, and that student today is at Babson.
There you go. Well, I had a student that missed out on a full tuition scholarship to a school that's tuition's about $60K. It's one of these ones where cost of attendance is north of 85.
Wow.
And it was, they didn't see the email. And they tried everything they could. Like they had a couple people reach out. No, we had a deadline. You missed the deadline. It's no. So, I mean, yeah, another missed opportunity is being at a college fair and just coming up and asking stuff that you could have just got with one click of a mouse.
Yeah.
Well, what majors do you offer?
500.
I remember one time I was having a conversation with an Amherst rep at a fair that I was partly organizing, and it was like check down time. So he was like packing up his stuff, and you know how you got to put all your brochures and everything and pack it up is over. And so I was just asking him, like, what were the questions like? He was just kind of shaking his head, I flew in here, and but I say hotel, airfare, rent a car, meals, and like people come up and they just ask me stuff that, like, I didn't have to come all the way here. Like you could have literally got that answer in 30 seconds. So, missed opportunities. So not trying to be negative, but just trying to share some stuff that goes on behind the scenes and some mistakes that people hopefully can avoid.
Yeah. Can I give you two more quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. I think this is a topic our listeners will like.
This was one that University of Chicago, it was a portal thing. Student was deferred. They gave a deadline in the letter that was on the portal. And they didn't really realize the date to turn in, I'm still interested in why you want to go. They missed, like, by the time they opened it, it was the day after the deadline.
Wow.
And I was like, you're done. That's it. You can't miss that day. They gave you 30 days to come up with something, and it's February 1st.
Yeah, I mean, another one is just students hand teachers a resume, with all their activities, and then the teacher just recites like their activities, and that's not what colleges are looking for in the teacher rec section. And so you just regurgitate that, and the rec was really of little value to that. They have an activity section for that. That's not what they want from the teacher. You had two more. There's one more you got for me?
When the admissions officer responds to your email, and they provide all this information, there's no response from the person who received it, from the student, saying thank you for all this information. Oh, that was really helpful. If they've engaged you and there's no response, not good.
Yeah, and I mean, and we literally could do a whole podcast, Vince, on just college specific questions and all the missed opportunities there, right? By saying stuff like you're close to the beach, you're in the city, just the generic, your class size is small, your academics are good, like all the real generic stuff that's just missed opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you want to be at NYU and don't tell us about New York City?
Right.
Remember that?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's funny, every time schools say that, when they talk about it, I can just literally picture the looks on their faces. Like they say it with such contempt and such disdain that you just know they have just seen it so many times. It's almost like if I read it one more time, I've got to vomit. It's like, and it's, I mean, you hear that all the time. And I mean, there's a strategic way to enter the city in, like, your international affairs internships during junior year and your partnership with the UN. Like there's a way to do it with specificity, but not the generic stuff. So, well, hopefully listeners grabbed a nugget or two out of this. But that's it was a little different one, but it's something that it makes sense. Like, it's not some coy, unique term with an acronym or something, but it's just still falls under admissions vernacular. Missed opportunity. All right, our big number, 135 million. So direct admissions is really growing. tremendously. And I know we've talked about it a lot. We'll come back and talk about it a lot more in the future. In fact, I found a pretty good article on it that might have one of our admission insiders, thought leaders address. But that's how much the College Greenlight program saw in scholarships in year one, just in Chicago, just working with a handful of schools, $135 million. And that's just one of the programs, right? You've got huge initiatives coming out of Common App, Niche, and multiple others with their own versions of direct admission. So, I don't see the highly selective schools really going there, but most schools are not highly selective. And so for the masses of others, Chronicle of Higher Ed is the article I'm talking about. They had a really good article on this that we'll probably be discussing. But that's the big number, $135 million.
Wow.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Okay, so this article is one in the Washington Post. It's by Teddy Amenbar. Came out February 13th, 2023. And shout out to our esteemed co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff. She sent this to me, and I really liked it a lot. She's always sending me stuff. So it's called The Less College Students Sleep, the Worse Their Grades Study Finds. So the article looks at how, before I say anything, Vince, I have to say, I don't know if I've had an article where I was so convicted myself, because I'm reading this, realizing I break all of these rules. About 3 or 4 years ago, I had this client in suburban Pennsylvania, and I used to live there. So it's a common place for me to work, but both parents were doctors. And, I constantly wanted to get on and talk with them about their son. And the mom, she was always like, before we start, have you been on the treadmill? Before we start, how many hours of sleep did you get? And I used to kind of blow her off. And then one time she said, no, I'm like concerned about you. I'm a doctor. Mm-hmm. So this is a classic case of, what's it saying? Do what I say, not what I do, or do what I'm butchering it. I'm not the
idea.
I'm not the example here. I'm working on it, but I'm floundering. But this was very, very convicting. So the article talks about how every lost hour of nightly sleep at the start of the academic term predicted a 0.07 drop in GPA, according to a 2-year study of the sleep habits of more than 600 college freshmen. And the proceeds were published in February in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And so what they found was that when a student sleeps less than 6 hours a night, the effect of lost sleep was even more pronounced. And that's according to the lead author of the study, David Creswell, who also is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Carnegie Mellon. So this is a quote from Creswell. He says, "You're accumulating this sleep debt." And he also says, and is a pretty negative role in terms of people's academics. So he goes on to say, sleep, especially undisturbed sleep, it helps the brain process and retain information that it has learned. And when someone is sleep deprived, their attention span and their memory is impaired. And that was the part that was a jab for me, Vince, because the article does go on to say everybody's different. And I've always not really slept that much. So I was like, yeah, I'm that person that doesn't need that much. So I found my, you know how you selectively look for stuff to confirm your own biases. So,
right.
so I was like, yeah, that's me, the one who doesn't need as much, because the article said everybody's different. But the part that really got to me was when it said it impacts your attention span and memory, because I have noticed that I am really terrible with names, and it's gotten worse. Like, I'm great with numbers, places, but names, I'm just abysmal. So I was like, maybe it's a sleep thing. And it was just really, really hard. I was going through some cognitive dissonance reading this, just keeping it real. So the article goes on to say the average students in the study, remember, these are college students, fell asleep at 2:30 a.m. Mm-hmm. And then it said barely any of them went to bed before midnight. And on average, they slept 6.5 hours. And then it says recommendations changed by age. Oh, I remember when I was reading this. Recommendations changed by age. I was like, yeah. Go on and say how you don't need as much when you're older. And then what does it say? It says, of course, the part I like, the amount of sleep can vary by person to person. But then it says, in general, for teenagers, 8 to 10 hours. Like, what planet do they live on? And then it says for 18 to 25-year-olds, it drops to 7 to 9 hours. So I was like, I don't even ever remember sleeping that much, even when I was like, in middle school. But anyway, Creswell and the team of researchers conducted 5 studies. And what they did was they recruited these college freshmen, had them taking courses in a wide range of different majors. And they were at 3 different schools. So at the University of Washington, which I will be at by the time this goes live. I'm excited. This will go live on Thursday, and I'll be at the University of Washington on Sunday.
Wow.
Pretty cool. Also, Carnegie Mellon and the University of Notre Dame. So what they did was to monitor the sleep, the students either wore a Fitbit Flex or a Fitbit HR for the entire academic term, spring semester or winter, depending on the school and their structure when it comes to academic terms. And Criswell said that they avoided studying students around final exams and term papers because they basically just assumed everybody's going to have their sleep disrupted then. So they knew that just kind of wasn't a good time to do the study. So they really wanted to look at this critical period in the semester when you're starting off and you're establishing your sleep patterns. Because their theory was, like, once you start with certain patterns, you're probably going to stick with them. And they controlled for other factors, too, such as whether the student takes naps, their class credits, and even their GPA from previous terms. And the researchers found that average nightly sleep continue to predict a student end-of-term GPA. What time a student went to bed and whether their bedtime varied did not play a role. So it was more about the amount of sleep as opposed to, what time somebody went to bed. So if you had someone went to bed at 3 a.m., but they got up at 10 a.m., then that was different. So it wasn't so much what time you go to bed, it was hours. And then they also point out that there was another study that was done at MIT that was published in 2019 that found the same association between grades and the amount of sleep students were getting. And basically that study went on to say it was really, really tough to make up for bad sleep habits. Now, the article says it's not clear why less sleep would cause someone to have a lower GPA, Creswell said. Sleeping for longer, uninterrupted periods of time allows that REM sleep, that rapid eye movement sleep. Then the theory is that corresponds with high activity in the brain. But he did say that's just a theory that hasn't really been scientifically proven yet. He believes, or he thinks it's likely, that a regular pattern of insufficient sleep creates a sleep debt over time, which therefore leads to inability to concentrate. Goes on to say that these college students are going to class with a ton of sleep debt, and that's why they can't focus, and that's why they can't learn, and that's why they can't retain the information. And he says those things can really harm your ability to engage with the material. It also quotes a guy named Eric Prather, who's a psychologist at the University of California, San Francisco, and he's the author of the book called The Sleep Prescription. And this is one thing Prather says: there are multiple pathways to get a GPA, and sleep is like the glue that holds our lives together in a lot of domains, Prather says. When that whittles away or is less sticky, bad things are going to happen. And then the last thing I'll read, and then just see what your thoughts are, Vince. It said at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, 200 students and staff members have enrolled in a 7-week online course on building better sleep habits. And Rebecca Huxta, who's the director of public health and wellness at the university, said that since starting that program, participants have self-reported a decrease in the number of symptoms. And Roxanne Pritchard, who's a professor of psychology at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, said she finds that students have been exhausted, this is her term, exhausted since puberty. and they've grown accustomed to always feeling lethargic. Here's a quote from Pritchard. Fundamentally, it comes down to if we're not sleeping well, all systems are not a go. Our body is not prepared for the day ahead and what we're asking it to do if we don't have good basic chunk of nighttime sleep. So that's my recap of the article. What are your thoughts, Vince?
Well, this article really spoke to me because but right before I turned 30, I discovered that I had sleep apnea.
Oh, wow.
And I lived in Pasadena, and I would be driving to work at Pomona College, which is 35 minutes away. After having slept what I thought was, 7 to, 8 hours, 9 hours, and I would almost fall asleep.
Wow.
And when I spoke to my doctor at Kaiser about this, he suggested, he didn't believe me. I wasn't overweight. I wasn't a truck driver, all these things that they say about people who have sleep apnea. But he goes, you seem very, adamant about this. And at the time I was dating someone and they said, wow, I've never heard anyone who you have the weirdest sleep pattern I've ever heard. You just stop breathing and you stop for several seconds. And I was like, what? So I explained that to my doctor and he said, well, maybe you do. So they scheduled my sleep test, 9 a.m., thinking who's going to be able to fall asleep after a full night's sleep. Not only did I sleep on command, but I fell asleep 15 more times during the 2 hours.
I guess you proved it.
And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're alive. So I have always wondered, how long did I have this?
Yeah.
I wondered to myself if my grades would have been better than they were at Oxy. But I have to say that life after, and I was lucky because because I was going abroad, I was able to get surgery and they got rid of the sleep apnea. So
did you notice a difference?
Oh my God. It was like the energy level. The energy level alone, it was like someone took a blanket and lifted the veil and I could see it. So I have always wondered if high school and college would have been different if I had been getting the full amount of sleep. Because what happens when you have sleep apnea is you stop breathing several times a night and you never get into that sleep REM pattern that they're discussing. So having experienced good sleep, and I have to continually work at it, I wear a little monitor that tracks how many hours I sleep at night. I've gotten these little earbuds that keep any sound out. And now I wear like a total blackout goggles when I go to sleep.
Wow.
And I've been doing that for the last 5 months, with the exception of when I have clients at 5 and 6 in the morning. I don't do any of that.
Which Vince does for some of his international people. We were talking about that before we came on. Some of your Asian clients. Yeah.
I won't put the mask on or the earbuds because I know that eventually I'll wake up. But I found in the last 5 months that my outlook, my perspective has been much better because I think I'm getting more sleep and dropping into that REM. So I thought this article was great because you sort of sent me something that confirmed something that I was trying to have a better demeanor. And I have always felt since I was 30 that sleep is a major factor in how we interact and realize our potential.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's funny. It's funny how stuff pops in your head. I have another story. It's not necessarily the best, but I'll share it. So when I was a freshman at Michigan State, I remember this. I've always been very driven. I remember the first semester, or actually Michigan State was on a quarter system. So the first quarter, I pulled 7 all-nighters. And the reason why I was pulling these all-nighters was I was like highlighting everything I was reading, and it was ridiculous. Like I'd highlight all these, I'd have multiple colors with the highlighter, notes in the margin. I hadn't realized like you need to skim. Later I took 4 speed reading courses because they kept offering them there and I kept signing up. So I learned how to like skim and read fast, but I was doing that. And I can't remember where I learned it, but I remember learning it my first semester. I went to some presentation on sleep or on health or something. And I remember they talked about just how deleterious all-nighters are to your body. But the one thing they said that stuck with me is make sure you get 4 solid hours, like one sleep cycle. So I always tried to remember that. And I actually did notice it made a really big difference because pull an all-nighter and then like my body's out of whack for 2 days. But 4 straight good solid hours and my body felt recharged. But anyway, I'm not trying to say that all you need is 4 hours because the research here shows you need at least 6.5. My question is this, Vince. If a hard head like me doesn't practice this, how could we get students to take something like this seriously?
Well, I think one of the things the article talked about that I thought was good was that it seems like campuses are beginning or have already started programs that focus on wellness. And a lot of it has to do with mental health, but I think that the way that we respect our bodies, it has to include, what are we eating? What time are we going to bed? I will say that the students that I work with who go to boarding schools and there's no one monitoring their time, I find them to be more erratic than students who are,
I would have thought the opposite, having worked in a boarding school, because you have such a regimented schedule. Like, some boarding schools have lights out policy, some don't, but just your day is just so structured that, 7:30, 9:30, 8 to 10, mandatory study hall, that most boarding school students I've worked with, they say even when they get to college, they're just in that regimentation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, this is the thing I was thinking about, though, when you said colleges have programming. So, my daughter's been working at Duke in student affairs, and she calls Joy, my youngest, and she calls me probably, 4 or 5 days a week, just talking to me about stuff. And her biggest frustration is they can put on the most amazing programming, but getting people to come, because people are just so, and some of it maybe partially due because there's such a type A driven kid there. But those kids are very ambitious with the course schedule they're taking. They're in multiple clubs, fraternities, all these different things. Is really, really hard. That's partly why she was actually hired, is to drive enrollment and some of their programming. But she literally just called me yesterday, some Latinx initiative that they're doing, and she's trying to drive enrollment to it. It's like really, really, really great. She was asking me, I have a couple students at Duke from Latinx students. She knows that. And she was asking to see if I could get them in touch with her, and she can work a network to see if they can, you know what I mean? They can start tapping into their peer group, because it's really challenging getting kids to come to these things, even as schools offer them. And I've just got a real fresh perspective from talking to her about it, because, my days of being there starting to get a little more removed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a large part of it is when you initiate these programs, there has to be buy-in from the faculty. One of the best ways when I was in college to get people to come to something, two ways. One was to offer food.
Sure. Yeah, that is a good one.
And the second one was if it was tied to a course grade, so extra credit. People would show up in droves.
No, you bring up a really good point. Like, you have to meet people where they're at. Food is always a really good one, especially if it's something they like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And course credits is a good one too, or something like that. But I think that one, I need to really take this more seriously, personally, but I'm still thinking of ways besides that, because those things you're talking about are things that somebody needs to programmatically do. Like if you and I are talking to a student we have that's going off to college, I'm not sure what I would say to get them to take seriously how important sleep is. I guess I could share a study for there's a certain kind of person that might respond to that. I don't have any control over making sure there's really good lemon pepper chicken wings for them at the next function.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Or I certainly don't have any control over any course credit or anything like that. So I'm just trying to think like what I could do to affect change on this one. Besides, model it myself, which is the most important probably.
Yeah.
But people don't really see your sleep habits, so
no, I haven't.
So that's not really something like modeling fitness or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had that conversation, but I do for my seniors when they're finally settled and they've chosen their options. I send a 10 to 15 point list of things to think about, and eating well and sleep, wellness. They're all a piece of it. And sometimes, especially in this past year, because I've had more freshmen in college who took the brunt of the pandemic. They started maybe they were sophomores, I think, and they were out for a year and a half. They seem to be struggling the most that I've seen, more than the seniors who happen to go to school directly afterwards. And so I will bring up issues about, are there changes in the way that you're living? And I hear students say, well, I'm eating, just like fast food all the time, because when they were at home, they're getting more balance. And then I'm hearing, well, I'm up like every night till, 2:30. I will tell you, because I had sleep apnea, my roommates always called me grandpa, because I was going to bed.
You're going to bed early?
At 10, because I was just trying
in college.
Yes,
again, you have sleep apnea. I can't laugh.
So
you had a legit condition.
But I didn't know I had it. Anyway, so I will.
Grandpa, I got a new nickname for Vince, friends.
So I go down a list. And try to check out what their habits are, and if they're different from what I known them to be, then I say, what really worked? Oh, and a big thing. This is one thing I really tell parents. If you have an athlete who stops being an athlete, they don't know what to do themselves.
Yeah, one of the problems with that is just they have a lot more free time, but also they're used to burning so many calories.
Yes.
Too, that they might keep the same eating habits without the caloric expenditure. I think one thing that I'm just thinking I could do is really emphasize to students just how important attending the programming that colleges put on, because like they have a lot of research that goes into assessing why students excel, why they struggle, and then they try to meet it programmatically. And like, don't blow that stuff off, because there's the stuff's there to help you. And a lot of it is really based on real scientific research. So maybe that's one thing I can add to the charge. But look, Vince, this has been a great conversation, man. Thanks for sharing about your background.
My pleasure. I didn't expect to go there, but then I thought, wow, well, I've been trying to test this out and see if it works. And the fall this year was better than last year for sure.
Good stuff. Well, this is, I'm kind of a little intrigued by this. Maybe I'm not promising anything at all, but I wouldn't, at some point wouldn't mind having almost an expert come on to talk about this, a little bit more. I'm intrigued by it, actually, just on a personal level.
Okay.
So good stuff. Well, see you next month, my friend.
All right.
Be well.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hello, YCBK team. My name is Yuen, and I'm a parent of a high school senior and freshman in Southern California. Please share any coping tips you may have for us parents who are anxiously awaiting decisions. I feel frozen and unable to make family plans beyond April. This waiting is stressing me out. My kid, on the other hand, is doing just fine. I love your program. Thank you so much.
Okay, Lisa, we have another great question. This comes from Yuen. And she's got 2 kids, freshman and senior, in Southern California. And of course, this process is stressing her out. And the thing, we had to take this question because we also had a question that came in on Twitter that was very similar to this from a listener in Massachusetts that basically said, the waiting is killing me. So what's your advice on coping tips from parents who are finding the waiting is stressing them out?
Absolutely.
You're the psychologist.
Well, and I'm also an anxious parent too. So I feel y'all. I do. And so I think that, it's hard because anxiety is a really useful emotion. Evolutionarily, we use it to perceive danger, and then we get that extra energy. We respond to the danger with action, and then we're safe. But in the case of college decisions, you're just waiting. So there's no action, right? It's just the action is wait. And so while you're waiting, you can't take any further action. Like you can't plan your vacations. Maybe you don't know what admitted student days you're going to. You don't know anything. And so you're just waiting until the colleges release their decisions, and then your child releases their own decision. And that person has their own internal timeline, which may or may not line up with yours. So thus, you're spending a lot of time waiting. And usually when we wait, we worry. And I just want to outline some of the worries that parents, I think, are struggling with. And then I'll go through ways to try to make this all more comfortable. I think one worry that I hear people saying is, my kid's not going to go to college, which, I mean, at this point, you've listened to this podcast, your child has applied to a likely school, they've been admitted to an early action school or rolling admission school. So you already know they're going to college. And then even if that hasn't happened, we know that there are plenty of colleges that will accept applications even after May 1st. And NACAC has a clearinghouse list of them that they update periodically. And there's some really good schools on that list. So, my kid won't get anywhere is not a realistic concern. So that one we just have to toss out. Now, this second one is more realistic, which is, my kid is going to be disappointed and hurt. Yeah, that could seriously happen, especially if your student has applied to one or more of the reach schools and the lottery schools. There could be disappointment just kind of looming in their future. And there is really nothing any one of us can do about that one. If that was a school that was important to them, like, you wouldn't want them not to try. So but probably they're going to be disappointed. So, that's the only thing I can predict in life with 100% certainty, is that all of us are going to be hurt and disappointed at least once. And a lot of us are going to be hurt and disappointed more than once. And so that is just part of being a human being, unfortunately.
Can I say something for a sec?
Yes, you
Lisa?
may.
Most of us as parents, we kind of love our kids more than ourselves, and we would rather take the personal pain ourselves. And so part of what makes it really hard is we know they have fragile psyches. I was literally just talking with a California family about this exact same topic. Like, we know they have fragile psyches, and it's just hard to know that this process might be confidence debilitating rather than confidence enhancing. And so I think that's part of the angst is this going to take its toll on my kids' self-esteem, their sense of self-confidence? And I think that is part of what contributes to parent anxiety.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I find that watching my kids suffer with a disappointment or being upset, I would much rather a million times be upset myself or, punch me in the face. Don't do it to them, but you can't make those choices. And I think all we can do is just try to be confident in our ability to be supportive in those situations, because it's probably not going to be the last time it happens to your kid, even when they're still a kid. They might not get asked by the person they want to go to the prom with, or, insert troubles of teen life here. So that is the only thing that we can do, is just be confident that, we've raised our kids to be resilient, and that we are going to help them be resilient even through this difficult time. And then I think there's another reason that parents can get really anxious during this period, and I call that the parental status competition. And, that is sort of where people think, well, what if like my kid gets rejected from Harvard and my neighbor's kid gets accepted to Harvard, and then my neighbors start bragging on Facebook and Instagram that their kid was accepted, and I'm going to be sitting there feeling bad. And, to this one, I'll say, yeah, that's probably also going to happen. It's from somebody in your social circle. There are some parents who use the college decision process perhaps to brag about their child. They're maybe not thinking about how it might make other people in their community feel. And, they might walk around congratulating themselves, feeling kind of, maybe a little bit better than the average parent. And this is where, as parents, I think we have to work so hard to recognize our own biases and susceptibilities to it's basically peer pressure, right? And social hierarchy. And so, your kid is your kid, and that your kid is a unique and special and wonderful person with a lot of different talents. And that is the God's honest truth. And wherever neighbor Susie goes and whatever her parents say about it doesn't change anything about the reality of like how great your child is. And whatever any college says about it doesn't change the reality. So I think that is another thing that parents have to grapple with. Did you want to say something before
I do. I always like you. I remember you saying
Why do I ask these dumb questions?
Well, I remember you saying this to me a while ago. Said, "Do you have any opinions?" You said, "I always have opinions, Mark." So that could also fit. Yeah. That could also fit me. That could also fit me as well. So, I have a couple thoughts. One of them is. It doesn't seem like I'm going in a different direction, but I'll hopefully land the plane, as they say. So, one of the things that can be extremely hard when you're in college admissions, and if you work at a highly selective place, is like you're giving out a lot of bad news and you feel like you're dashing hopes. And if you're someone that really likes to help people and you feel like you're doing lots and lots of rejection, it can just be massively hard on your psyche. It's one of the reasons I actually left. It was just killing me. And for our regular listeners who heard Hillary Dickman's interview a few months ago, she talked about her first denial, and she was like ready to like be she was ready to like Ralph in the toilet. Like how am I going to do this job? And so there ends up being a couple people. Some end up leaving over it, but I've enjoyed conversations I've had with several people, including someone that you and I know that worked at a highly selective school and continued with it and didn't actually have that problem. And anyone that's sort of fallen in that category, that really didn't bother me that much. They've always said the same reason why. You want to take a guess?
They feel confident that wonderful student is going to find another great place to attend college and be happy.
Bingo, as I say to Dave, winner, winner, chicken dinner. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. If a lot of the angst is like any of the reasons we've talked about, like I don't want their, confidence or their fragile psyche, or I'm going to be embarrassed. I spent all this money to go to this private school and my friends thought I was crazy. And now my kid can't get in the flagship and their kids are getting in the flagship. Like whether it's motivated by embarrassment or pride or love for kid, like whatever the motives are, just knowing in the back of your mind, it's all going to work out. It really usually really does. I was talking to one of my students recently who ED'd to a highly selective school, did not get in. And then she got in a lot of like fantastic places, including right where you are, by the way, UNC Charlotte or UNC Chapel Hill, out of state, which is not an easy task.
Well, that is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not an easy thing to do. But she ended up picking a different school. And I was having a conversation with her and she, and she said, everybody here didn't get in their ED and we're all happy. And so that's kind of an important thing, I think, for parents to think about in the back of their mind. Because a lot of times I think they're creating this big, stressful event where they think like, okay, it's almost like this like fork in the road in life. Like if they don't get in, you go here. If they get in, they go here. And it's kind of usually not that. It may be that way for the next month if they don't get in, or a week or 2 months, whatever. Different people shake it off more quickly. So that's one thought. Another thought, I'm going to share a conversation because I know he wouldn't mind. So Brandon Barnard, friend of the show, we were in California together and that flying for 8 days. So we spent so many hours talking with each other. And we agree on like almost everything. But one thing we didn't agree on, we were having a conversation on this topic, Lisa, and just how hard it is to get in these highly selective schools and how disappointed people are. And I was actually making the point to him that, sometimes I question whether people should even really be trying to do this, just because all that bad news is like takes its toll. And he's like, this is where I disagree with you. And so his point was like, there's like a resilience that you build up
right
by experiencing disappointment that might not be fun in the moment, but it's like lifting weights and it's like making your muscles stronger.
Right. No, it's true.
Yeah, I thought he had a really good point. He really kind of caused me to rethink through that a little bit. So those are a couple of thoughts that were percolating in my head.
Right.
Anything else you want to add?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I have like some suggestions of ways we anxious parents can try to cope with this. And you kind of led into my first one, which is like, let's look at this situation with a long-term lens. In 15 years, is it going to matter to anyone really that your kid got rejected by, X university? I don't think so, because your kid probably went to Y university. They had a great experience and now they're working or they're in graduate school and they're doing something happy and productive. And, so it's like, it's going to be all right. They're going to find their way and no one's going to think about it. When I meet people, I don't ask them where they went to college typically. It just doesn't come up in the 40 to 55-year-old demographic. So it's not going to be an issue in the long run. And I think like rather than focusing on, the short term is to just try to enjoy the time that you can with your kid before they go off to college, and just try to stay sane, protect your mental health as well as theirs, and just, try to live a little bit more in the moment. Which is also kind of another coping thing, which is trying to live with uncertainty. I really identify with Yuen's statement that she feels stuck because she can't make any family plans. Before COVID, there was a time when I could tell you in February what everyone in my family was going to be doing on a certain day in July, and now I do not have that perspective. And so I'm really guilty of trying to plan things out too far in advance, at least wanting to. But like, I understand that she can't plan a lot, but if you don't have plans, then you give room and space for things to arise organically, and like kind of being in limbo allows you to have some spontaneity that you probably never allow yourself normally. So I say to try to live like the type B personalities do and just be in the moment and try to see what happens. And you might actually find that to be an interesting exercise. Before I move on to the next couple ideas, do you want to add anything?
One thing, and that is, I was having a conversation with the family I'm working with who, was just having a hard time with the waiting as well. And the mom made a comment to me. She said, I don't know if you know this about me, but I like to be in control. And a lot of times, parents are in positions where they get to control a lot of things. Maybe they're a teacher and they get to control what their lesson plans are. Maybe they're a doctor and they're pretty much scheduling a lot of things. Maybe they're a business owner. And one thing that people can find very difficult in this process is that they could do absolutely everything. They could put their kid in the best school they could possibly find. They could hire the best independent educational, counselor. They could pay for the best absolutely imaginable summer programs and tutors, and they could be cultivating their kids' gifts from the time they were 4, and then they can feel like they're still like a long shot at certain places that they might have a lot of interest in. And that loss of control can be really, really hard if you're someone who is in control of so many things in your life. Also, if you're someone that's been really successful and you're kind of used to getting your way, and now you feel like there's no Is that a laugh of guilt over there, Lisa?
No, I would
bust-
not say that. I've been so successful that I've had everything go my way. So I was just imagining the joy of feeling like that. But anyway.
So I think that emotion of I don't get to just intervene with my ingenuity and make things happen is really hard for people. I mean, I've been wanting to talk, I don't get into it now because it'll go off on a tangent, but I'll say this, a little do one of my teases. So I'll be having a tease at some point pretty soon, maybe with Julia coming up, where we talk about when you don't write a letter of continued interest. Like, there's some schools that do not want that. And when I'm having those conversations with people, it absolutely drives them crazy.
Right, because there's just nothing they can do. Zero.
Yes, and they're so used to being, doers, type A, make it happen. And now you're told, like, just wait. And waiting is hard.
Yeah, I'm a terrible waiter myself, really bad. But the strategy that I honestly employ the most in my own life is to mind my own business. And by that, I mean, like, you're worried about something with, what if, like, this kid doesn't get into that place and you're spinning like, hey, Lisa, don't you have something else you could be doing with your brain right now? Don't you have an article to read or a list to build or a phone call to make or even like the laundry? And so a lot of times I just have to take my brain off of that worry and then start focusing it on, things that reasonably I can have some sort of action or accomplishment with. And then, I feel a little bit better. My clothes are clean, my articles read, my reports written. And I think that, it's really important for parents, especially if this is like maybe, a kid that's going to be gone from the house and you're going to have a lot more time after they go to college. It's good practice, right? Because, even for me with my son now being in middle school, I'm just kind of like, nobody needs me to do anything for them right now. It's kind of unsettling, and I have to practice again. What else can you be doing instead of taking care of other people? So just kind of focus on your own stuff, like change your mindset to your own life and not so much what's going on with your kid.
When you said that, it made me think of another thing, which is our kids, they will feed a lot off of our energy. And so especially if we act like it's such a major big deal if you get in this school or not, they're going to read that. So sometimes we need to like work on our own self. And
Absolutely.
That might mean, and that's going to be different for some person. It might be like prayer or meditation, or someone else it might be like yoga, or someone else it might be like jogging or getting on the treadmill or walking, or, you know what I mean? Or whatever, like everybody's different with how they sort of cope with that stuff. But I really would encourage people this is a time to try to work on self and work on communicating to your kid the message we try to preach every single episode. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there.
Right.
Like, there's opportunities abound at all of these schools. And by the way, I'm glad you don't ask people like where you go to class. I think it's so gauche when people do that, because it doesn't really
talk about that next.
No, because it really doesn't tell.
Mind.
I try to. We've been working together for a while. So, because the thing about it is so many times, honestly, where people end up going to college is a function of either their social class or their resources. Like there's so many times kids in public schools, like if they go to college at all, they just go to the local neighborhood school, they go to the regional school, and that kid could be smarter than the smartest person in the whole county. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so where someone does to college, I know there's some school snobbery out there in certain social classes that looks at people through that prism and sizes them up. Just like there's that with what car you drive and what your occupation is and all that stuff. But, that's just to me, that's just wasted futile energy. But it sounds like you want to say something, so I don't want to let you say your
I
thing.
want to say something. And yeah. So, and I 100% obviously agree with what you said. And I think it is really gauche when people are asking someone whose child or that child who's going through the application process where they're going or how it's going before they've made their decision. If they want to volunteer that and tell you that's great. It's kind of like you never ask somebody if they're pregnant because like you just wait for them to tell you and you just mind your own business again. But that's the thing, like you have to kind of ignore social pressures from other people as parents. And I feel like, well, maybe Susie's parents want to make this whole college admissions thing and some kind of super toxic, unhealthy status fight, but that doesn't mean you have to play along with it. Just ignore it. Don't opt out. And so
I would say
I
sometimes that's harder said than done, though, because especially if it's like, let's say it's like your mother and like, you know, like sometimes it can come at you from anybody because I've seen like if it's someone that's really important to you, like that's, you know what I mean? That's like, it's just easier said than done. Let's say that.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I understand that. And like opting out takes a tremendous amount of discipline. You have to be like, not going to respond to that. I'm not going to care about that. I'm going to go mind my own business and go do something else. And over. That's like a muscle. Like I would say that Brennan would say that we have to exercise as parents. And I think like, when people ask inappropriate questions, I like to give them inappropriate answers. So I think, you know, you could kind of shame somebody a little bit when they say like, well, what's going on with juniors college? Have they gotten into like Harvard yet? Just say like, well, we're going to let our child make that choice. We think our child is a great kid and they are going to make an amazing choice that is going to help them begin their adult life. And it's going to be the best fit for them. And then just walk away. So just kind of like subtly saying like you're being, you know, a status conscious person by asking this question and it's none of your business. I frankly think that more of us parents who can band together and say, we're not going to get involved in this, that like, I feel like parenting in the upper middle class is sort of like this toxic anxiety slog is I guess how I'd put it. It can feel like that sometimes. I think the more we can all just opt out of it, the better it's all going to be for everyone.
Yeah. And one of the problems is it's the echo chamber. You're in the echo chamber. You're in the parent echo chamber. You're in the student echo chamber. You're in your school. It seems like it's the only thing that matters. But step back a little bit and like talk to some kids that have been out a couple years or parents that have had kids that have gone to, maybe they never got in their first choice and they ended up going somewhere else. Like have those kinds of conversations and it will help a lot. But I don't also want to assume that the waiting is all related to like, you know, status and all that. Like it could be, but it might not be at all.
It's like
you know, it might not be at all.
Other reasons that we've talked about, you know, like not wanting to see your kid hurt or just worrying that things are going to go badly. But I have a quote that I really like. And I think this was brought to light by John Lennon most recently, but I think somebody else originated, I think it was a Brazilian writer. But the quote is, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. And I love this quote because it kind of reminds me that if things didn't work out yet, you just have to keep plugging away at it and keep trying until you make it okay, whatever that looks like. And that's a good lesson for our students to have too, that you have to be persistent. And if you want to go someplace and you keep trying to get there, then and you try all different kinds of ways, I think probably you're going to get there. And to not give up if you don't get the outcome that you wanted, to like keep on persevering until you know, feel that you have the success that you deserve in whatever form that looks like. So, and that is all I have to say about that.
Well, Yuen, thank you. And I always just shout out to California because California rocks. I've said this before, like we have almost 3 times more listeners there than any other state. So California is just crushing it. And so we love California and we love our California listeners. So thank you.
Yeah. And Yuen, if you're up in the middle of the night, like you're not alone until, you know, you get your answers or your student gets your answers. You're going to have a whole bunch of other parents up at night worrying too. So this, you know, and it will all be okay.
You know, something that's like seared in my mind is, this is going back now, this is 2014, but Karis walked down the steps and I knew she had applied early decision at Davidson. And she walked down the steps and I knew I can't remember how I knew, but she, you know, she said something like, Dad, got my answer, and she did one of those little coy things where she did the little poker face on me. And I remember my heart was just beating a million miles a minute, because in my mind, it was like, I didn't want her to be crushed, because she had spent 3 weeks there at a summer program. And she actually had visited 4 times. So like, she was one of these people that had like a really clear first choice. Now, she's also that kid that handles things like that really well if she hadn't got in. But I remember, like, for me, it was a lot of like, is this going to impact her fragile, or is she going to be fragile if she doesn't get what she wants? And so, I mean, she got the good news that she wanted, but I realized, like, look, that was 2014. Like, it's gotten a lot harder in the last 9 years.
Yeah.
So,
it's a super difficult
the last 3
situation.
years, like, I really noticed since the pandemic and the schools had their 20, 30, 40, 50% surge. In some cases, it's kind of amazing. Like, I think of the WashUs and the UPenns and the Richmonds and Clemson's. Like, there's so many schools that I can't even work off past knowledge of how they made decisions in the past, because the last 3 years is just so totally different. So I feel for families, and there's just so many stressors coming at kids and just other things too. Like, college is just one of the many other things that's coming at them, So like, I mean, the prom and just so many things. And so it's just a hard time to be a teen and a hard time to be a parent too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to remember that mental health is the most important thing for your child. It's more important. I mean, whether they go to an IV or whether they have good mental health will take them farther in life every single day.
And for parents, right?
Yeah. And for us too.
Yeah. Because you can't even help your kids without, that you can help them, but maybe you're functioning at 50% or 60% or whatever on a half empty tank if your mental health is jacked up.
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing I think I'd say as a therapist to people is that you can't rely on anyone else's opinion of you, because their opinions of you are subjective. Maybe the person's in a bad mood that day, or there's other factors you don't know about. The only thing you can do is to do as well, that that you did your best, or, that you did the best you could given the situation, and that you have to hold that judgment of yourself, and no one else can. And that's a hard lesson to learn. And in fact, like, I think, like getting grades in school, and just there's so many things, and, like performance evaluations at work, we're always being measured against some metric, but none of them are truly accurate or fair oftentimes. So we just have to know in our hearts that, we're all good people. Your kids are great people. And, like I said, it's going to be okay in the end, because you're going to make it okay.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
And we have a brand new interview, and it's with Alison Merzel, a former grad school admission officer for 15 years at Ohio State, currently a private college coach in Ohio. And Alison will be helping us to understand the challenges Jewish students face on college campuses, how to know if a college is a safe space for Jewish students, and how to support Jewish students. And this will be part 1 of 3. Friends, you're in for a treat today. I'm here with Alison Merzel from the great state of Ohio. How are you, Alison?
I'm doing great, Mark. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, friends, I mentioned a while ago that we have a lot of talent in our parent listening community, and you'd be hearing from quite a few voices over the next 6 months. And Alison is one of those voices. She wears quite a few hats. But rather than let me share them, Alison, why don't you give us a little bit about your background so listeners understand the context from which you'll speak?
Sure. So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago in a Big Ten family.
Nice.
So that was going to be my destiny too.
Nice.
You'll laugh about this, Mark, but I had a housing application in at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
But I decided not to go there because I found out that they didn't take you. No, that's no. I ended up actually, I majored in communications and minored in Spanish at Northwestern University, so another Big Ten school.
Lisa loves this.
And yes. And I studied in Spain during my junior year. So I was a study abroad kid. And coming out of college, I got a job in media planning for a Chicago advertising agency. So I did that. I actually met my husband when I was at college. So I worked for 2 years and we had a long distance relationship. He moved to Columbus, Ohio. And when he proposed, that is what brought me to Ohio. So I thought I was only going to be here for a couple of years. And lo and behold, you've heard this story before. I've been here for quite a long time. So when I moved to Columbus, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And I ended up applying to graduate school at The Ohio State University. So I pursued a master in labor and human resources, which is what it was called then. And I worked for 2 years in the graduate programs office of the business school as a graduate assistant. And that essentially is what exposed me to higher education as a potential career path, right? I think a lot of times growing up, kids don't know that you can actually have a job in higher education outside of being a professor.
And even when they know, they're not interested. Trust me, I'm always trying to recruit admissions professionals, and it always ends on deaf ears.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed working in the admissions office. And while I thought I was going to pursue a career in corporate human resources following the completion of my master's, I had the opportunity to apply to become the assistant director of MBA admissions. So I took that job, which kept me at Ohio State, and I was pretty much there for the next 15 years. So when I left Ohio State, I was the senior director of graduate recruitment, admissions, and financial aid. And after a little bit of time there, I wanted to take a break. So I have 3 kids, and now I have 2 dogs. And I wanted to pivot away for a little bit. So I did some consulting work in the year that I was making a change. I worked for the Graduate Management Admissions Council and their professional development team, helping to plan annual industry conference. They were my source of professional development as an admissions professional when I was at Ohio State. And then I decided to launch my own independent educational consulting practice. So I did that in the beginning of 2019, and then also pursued concurrently my certificate in independent educational consulting through UC Irvine's Continuing Education Division. I am now a professional member of IECA, the Independent Educational Consultants Association, where I serve on the college tour subcommittee, and I'm also the co-chair of the Jewish IEC affinity group. So that's a little bit about me. Let me know if you need any more.
No, that's great. That's great. And that's a great segue. So I'm going to say a few more things about Alison. She is a loyal and faithful listener of our podcast almost since inception, maybe since inception. She's also a member of our college counselor confab group. And I had reached out to her about a year and a half ago and said, listen, you formerly were in this role, director of MBA for Ohio State. You live in Ohio. You've been there a long time. You know Ohio State better than me. I'd love to have you come on to talk about Ohio State. But that just in subsequent communication with her and to see sort of some of the expertise she has around Jewish students, anti-Semitism, and the role she plays, given what's going on in the country right now, I said, let's do a switcheroo. I'd love to have you come on and talk about a number of things related to support for Jewish students, understanding how to discern if an environment is Jewish friendly, educating our listeners about anti-Semitism. And then we can come back and pick Ohio State back up down the road. Ohio State's not going anywhere. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
So I thought I'd give a little bit about my personal background and why I'm interested in this topic. I was raised in a conservative Jewish household. My paternal grandparents kept kosher, and supposedly my maternal great-grandfather was born in what is now Israel, giving my family a direct connection to our Jewish homeland. Yeah, and I'm raising my children in a conservative Jewish household. I've been an active member of my synagogue board of trustees and in a leadership role. My children have attended Jewish preschool and religious school, as well as go to Jewish overnight camp. So this is a topic that is certainly important to me. And when I was going to college, I absolutely did not need to worry about anti-Semitism in the equation. This was not part of the conversation as it is now for Jewish students that are looking for colleges and making sure that they can find a safe space.
With that background, let's just dive right in, Alison. What is anti-Semitism? And I'm glad we're starting with that because not everybody knows. And talk to us about that.
Yeah, I actually saw a statistic recently that half of Americans had never heard of anti-Semitism and don't know what it is.
Wow.
So that was super surprising, right? So anti-Jewish sentiment has been around for centuries. The term anti-Semitism actually wasn't coined until 1879. And a German journalist by the name of Wilhelm Bahr came up with that word. And it was essentially to denote the hatred of Jews and essentially any activities pertaining to Jews. So there's a dictionary definition of anti-Semitism, which is prejudice, oppression, or discrimination against Jews as individuals or as a group. There's a group, though, called the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, IHRA, and it's comprised of 30-something member countries. It's the only intergovernmental organization mandated to focus on issues relating to the Holocaust. And in 2016, they came up with a working definition for anti-Semitism, which states, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So the most extreme form of anti-Semitism in our history is the Holocaust, during which 6 million Jews were murdered. Another surprising and somewhat frightening statistic is that according to a survey in 2018, only 36% of millennials in the United States actually know that the Holocaust happened.
Wow.
So anti-Semitism today shows up in many ways. You can't watch the news lately without hearing about Kanye West's latest anti-Semitic rants. And I'm sure you might have heard that there was a banner hanging over the Los Angeles freeway that said Kanye is right about the Jews, and there were people giving a Nazi salute. So it is, it really is showing up in increasing numbers, and 75% of American Jews say, yes, absolutely, anti-Semitism has increased over the past 5 years. There is something called an anti-Semitism tracker that an organization called the Anti-Defamation League has available. And just between January and December of this year, there have been 510 incidents reported. So just to give you some examples of what these incidents look like, swastikas and threatening messages were written inside bathroom stalls at a high school in Montana. Anti-Semitic flyers were distributed in Culver City and Beechwood Canyon, California. A man yelled anti-Semitic statements and performed a Nazi salute at the Seattle airport. So there's numerous types of these kind of incidents that are showing up. And I think now there are many more places to report these, and obviously a news cycle that helps us see that these events are happening much more frequently.
Yeah, and I've also seen how the statistics on Twitter, since Elon Musk has taken over, it's on, appreciably on the rise. All hate, actually, anti-Asian hate, Black, all of it. One thing that I notice is there is a real fear with Jewish students about the college environment. I don't know this scientifically, but about 30% of the students I work with are Jewish, and probably 20 or so would be Black, and then maybe 15 would be Asian. All groups have fear. I actually see more fear in the Jewish community right now than I do in the Black community. Remember, we had the HBCU bomb threats. We had all of that, especially during COVID. It was really bad, the Asian hate that was going on.
Right.
But there's actually, this is just anecdotal, I've more fear about the environment and what it's going to be like for my student. And is this environment I'm going into Jewish friendly? So it's really important we talk about it. Are you hearing similar things? What are you picking up out there?
Absolutely. And sadly, I think it's not easy to find a college campus where you can safely say that you're going to avoid anti-Semitism, right? 60% of religious hate crimes in 2019 were directed at Jews, and 13% of all hate crimes were directed at Jews. So it is really happening everywhere, and particularly on college campuses, because if you think about it, a campus is bringing people from all over the world in one place living together, and it's not like you can kind of ignore what's happening. And so it makes for kind of a perfect storm of opportunity. And also, when you think about it, there are some students, honestly, that until they get to a college campus, they might not have ever met a Jewish person before. So there's just a lot of misinformation out there as well that is cause, misinformation and ignorance, right? That is cause for a lot of this.
No, I wish that we were talking about something more inspirational, but we do need to live in the real world and deal with real issues and not, hide from them, because silence is consent. And,
correct.
And that's why I feel very strongly we can't have a podcast like we have, where we have around on average 2.5 hours a week of content, 10 hours a month, or months we have five weeks in the month, 12 hours of content, and not talk about this. If we didn't talk about it, we would be really approving and saying that we're not troubled by what's going on. So we're going to deal with it.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Today's recommended resource comes to us compliments of Kirkby McEiler, who has pointed out that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has a great feature on its Occupational Outlook Handbook page on its website. And it has something called Field of Degree, and it lists all these different degrees. And if you click on them, you can see where people with those majors end up and what kinds of jobs they have and how much they tend to make. So this is a great resource for anyone who is looking into trying to figure out a major or making a career change. And it has a super long website name, but I'll just say if you go to bls.gov and type in field of degree into the search term, then you will arrive at the right page.
I know Jews are often perceived as a monolithic group. Can you explain a bit more about the diversity of the Jewish people?
Sure. And just to give you a perspective, as of 2020, Jews just comprised 0.2% of the world population. And according to Pew Research Center, 2.4% of the U.S. population identifies as Jewish. So really, we are a small minority of the population. And Jews are unique because, yes, Judaism is the oldest monotheistic religion, but Jews are a culture and an ethnicity, right? So that's not the case with other universal religions. And so some Jews are religious and other Jews are culturally and ethnically Jewish, but not at all religious or observant. The other thing to note is that Jews have many intersecting identities. 12 to 15% of American Jews identify as Jews of color, 10% identify as LGBTQ+. So for many Jews, it can be super challenging, right, if they're seeing discrimination and hate coming from multiple directions at them.
Alison, I have a question that popped in my head. You can help me with this. So sometimes I will be working with a Jewish family, and, we'll just be texting away. No problem. All this texting, no problem. Then other times I'll get a message back, we don't text on the Sabbath. Like, can you give me advice? Like, I'm like, how am I supposed to know when that's the policy and when, not policy,
Yes.
when that's the practice and when it's not? So embarrassing to me. It's happened to me twice in the last 4 months.
It is okay. And there's absolutely not one right way to approach this because every Jewish family is going to handle their practices differently. So what I would say is if you are working with a new client, right, and you know that they are a Jewish family, just ask them, just say, do you observe the Sabbath? Do you communicate on Saturday or on Friday night or not? I want to be respectful of that. Similarly, do you observe the Jewish high holidays, right? So sometimes non-Jewish people think, Yom Kippur is a day off of work and I have time to be able to do stuff. The students aren't in school potentially, right? If they're in a school district where the religion is observed and there's no school. Some students will not want to work on the holiday because it's the most religious holiday of the year, and they're going to be in synagogue or observing with their family. And other students that are not at all religious might take that opportunity to meet with you, right? So I think just asking about their practices and traditions up front will set it up so that you don't have to be embarrassed later on.
That's such a simple thing. Why didn't I think about it? Just ask. Profound and simple, right? All in one. What is your theory as to why, anti-Jewish hate is on Jewish hate is on the rise?
Well, this is a complicated question, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I think it doesn't help when public figures, like Kanye West and Nick Fuentes and other people, Kyrie Irving, come out and say things that are defamatory, right?
Yeah.
There's also just a lot of misunderstanding, and there's been a perception for many, many years about the Jews that just people don't understand, and I think that it's very easy to find people to become scapegoats, and sadly, that has often been the case for Jewish people. A lot of this stems from years and years and years of misinformation and stereotypes, right? Like the two pervasive myths about Jews that started in the Middle Ages were, number one, the false accusation, right? The Jews murdered Jesus, that still some people believe today. And two, that there was some sort of a blood libel practice where Jews would murder Christian children and use their blood for ritual practices. I mean, these things, as crazy as it sounds to say that today, there are people that still ascribe to these things, right? And there's also a lot of, some of the things that you hear are coming out in the news about Jewish people, right? Some of the main myths are about Jews being greedy or disloyal or controlling media or the banks and government, right?
Right.
If you look back to the history, Jews were not permitted to do any of these things. Jews had to build their own companies, right? Create their own organizations because we were excluded from doing all of these things. And then they have become successful in a lot of these industries. And so there's just a lack of understanding. At a time when Jews were not able to be hired in many jobs, the only jobs they could take were tax collectors, rent collectors, and money lenders. And so then that kind of jumps into, oh, this is why, Jews are controlling the banks and the financial institutions, right? No, this is just a misunderstanding of kind of the evolution of what's happened when you are excluded from something and you have to find your own place. There's just, that's happening. I think in terms of on college campuses, though, a huge part of the anti-Semitism that is showing up on college campuses has to do with the years-old and complicated conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And so regardless of a Jewish student's affiliation with the state of Israel, that is a lot of times where the anti-Semitism on college campuses is showing up and is making it a not safe place for Jewish students.
And it seems like it's coming from the left and the right. Would you agree with that or not?
Absolutely. So I think if you think of how it used to be, right, a lot of when you think of the right being kind of traditional white supremacists and
Right.
people that just didn't like Jews and the KK, the Ku Klux Klan, and that was more kind of the right view of anti-Semitism. And now what's happening is there's a lot of people on the far left that are very much in favor of social justice, but there are also many Jews who are as well. And this is why it's complicated, right? A Jewish student or a Jewish person doesn't necessarily have to agree with Israeli politics, but if I can read, there was a report. So there's something called the Amcha Initiative, and they put out a report recently called Campus Anti-Semitism and the Assault on Jewish Identity. And I think if I can read this little excerpt, it might help to understand. Sure. It says, on most campuses today, identity politics play a crucial role in campus life. And for Jewish students who identify as Zionists or have an affinity for the Jewish state, an affinity which, according to the Anti-Defamation League, is shared by the vast majority of Jews around the world, campus life can be profoundly challenging. A recent Pew study validated ADL's claim, finding that more than 80% of Jews view Israel as integral to their Jewish identity. No other campus identity group is routinely subject to the kinds of well-orchestrated campaigns of identity assault that Zionist and pro-Israel students have had to endure for the last several years at schools across the country. And so, although the impact of these threats is felt most acutely by students that identify as Zionists or hold, pro-Israel views, they can really have a profound impact on Jewish students who come to campus with little or no background or knowledge or personal connection to the state of Israel. So just being Jewish on a campus is generating all sorts of threats to their identity. And I think also what's interesting to note is that the incidents are going to be higher at the campuses that are most popular with Jewish students. That probably makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll just share two quick snippets. Originally, I was actually going to have two different people come on and talk about this topic. I was going to have you, Allison. I was going to have another person who's done a lot of research on putting resources together for Jewish students. And in talking with that particular person, they backed out because they have a student going through this process, and they literally were concerned because of the anti-Jewish fervor. Is it going to reverberate back and end up being deleterious in their process? So that just speaks a little bit to the fear that's out there. And then another story, I have another student I'm working with this year who, well, and I'm going to name names. I really am. So they were quite serious about Wellesley. And then they started reading articles in the Wellesley newspaper and started sort of reading a lot about BDS. You probably should talk about BDS because that's a topic that comes up a lot, and they're not happy with how that was being handled. They dropped it off their list. So what can you share?
Sure. And there's definitely lots of resources, and I encourage the listeners to kind of look up a little bit more information to understand, because there's a lot of falsehoods out there. So BDS is the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement. And it's an international campaign that is aimed at delegitimizing and pressuring Israel through the diplomatic, financial, professional, academic, and cultural isolation of Israel, Israeli individuals, Israeli institutions, and increasingly Jews. And ultimately, Jewish people feel that it is in support of basically doing away with Israel's right to exist, right? So if you're on a campus that has support for a BDS movement, they are essentially saying, we don't believe Israel has a right to exist, and therefore, we don't support Jews in their self-determination to have a homeland. And so it can be very controversial. And absolutely, I think Jewish students need to understand what the politics are like on a college campus and determine what their comfort zone is, right? What are they looking for, and how do they identify? How religious are they? How observant? Are they willing to advocate for themselves? And most importantly, too, what is the administration doing to show support for Jewish students? When there are protests on campus or resolutions being put forth to the student government, right? What is the general student body having to say? What is the administration saying? What kind of support is there for Jewish students on campus?
Now, you mentioned Zionism earlier. What is Zionism, and what's the connection between Zionism and anti-Semitism?
Right. So that is the key to why there is so much conflict on the college campus. So Zionism is technically defined as the movement for the self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, which is the land of Israel. And now Zionism is almost this taboo word because it's associated with, displacement of Palestinians and not treating people well. And there's a huge, long, multi-year history and very complicated past with the state of Israel and Israeli and Palestinian. And I really am not a historian or a politician, so I'm not going to get into all of the weeds of that. But because of this, this, especially, there's a student group on campus called Students for Justice for Palestine, and that often tends to be the organization that is putting out language that is, anti-Zionist, and then also essentially anti-Semitic, because as I shared, a few minutes ago, many Jewish students do feel a strong affinity to this Jewish homeland of Israel, even if they've never been there. And so essentially, they feel like they are being attacked, even if they really don't agree with Israeli politics, right? There are many Jewish people that don't agree with Israeli politics. That doesn't mean that they don't believe Israel has a right to exist, right? There's a big difference there. And so I think that's where it can become really, really complicated. And there's obviously two sides to every story. And I encourage, there's multiple resources, which, I'm happy to share in terms of how your listeners can educate themselves about anti-Semitism and Zionism and what's happening. In talking about the, conflict on college campuses, particularly as it relates to, anti-Israel sentiment, I want to make sure to clarify that it is absolutely okay for students to criticize Israel, to criticize Israeli politics and Israeli actions. Many Jewish students are highly dissatisfied with what's happening in Israel. And I just came back from a trip to Israel myself and have relatives there who are really upset with the current Israeli government. There's a huge difference in expressing freedom of speech and expressing dissatisfaction with a government and then translating that to an attack on Jews or an attack on Israel's right to exist. And so that's where sometimes there's a fine line. I mentioned earlier about a slogan that was written on the rock at Northwestern University. And it said this phrase that is, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And this evokes an anti-Semitic sentiment coming out of the terror organization Hamas, because from the river to the sea is this notion that from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, Israel will be gone and Palestine will be in its place, right? So this notion that we want to rid the world of the country, of the state of Israel, is then certainly an anti-Semitic sentiment, different than we feel terrible about the state of Palestinians or we want there to be better rights, right? So I think there's a huge difference there, and students and families and administrators and faculty, everyone needs to understand that.
That's really helpful. I think nuance is so important, and I always appreciate nuance, so thanks for that. Friends, this concludes the first part of our 3-part interview. I hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, I'm here with Lisa, and Lisa recently visited University of North Carolina, Wilmington, a school that excites me a lot. And I said, would you be willing to do a spotlight? And, she's such a team player. She said, sure. So here we are today. So take it away, Lisa, in your own way.
Well, I'm happy to talk about UNC Wilmington because I think it has so much to offer. As a North Carolina resident with college-going kids, so I'm almost a little like I don't want to talk about it because it's sort of flying under the radar a lot of places. But I can really see it's going to be. I think it's one of those hidden gems. It's already starting to not be hidden. So I was ambivalent about it. But basically what happened it was a nice week. I knew it was going to be a nice weekend. For once, we did not have anything on a Saturday. My 15-year-old daughter, Sonia, who's in 9th grade, finds me rather irritating these days. And so we don't.
So wait a minute. Lily said the same thing.
I think it's them. They think it's me. I'll let y'all be the judge.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you a pass because you're so awesome. But if Thomas says the same thing, then they might be onto something. There might be another side of Lisa.
No. I don't know. I think it's just like if someone always is telling you to clean your room, then you find them annoying. But
we all know that. We all have kids.
So I decided to take a chance and sort of say, hey, Sonia, would you like to go to see this college? It's by the beach, and I'll take you to a very nice lunch, and anything that you buy in the shop, the college bookstore, I would consider a business expense. So that was sufficiently motivating for her. So we hopped in the car and we drove the 2.5 hours there.
You're pretty good with this bribery. You know that?
Oh, I was born to bribe.
Giving our parents great bribery ideas.
But, the bookstore was closed, so it didn't even matter. So it's too late for her then, though. She was already there. So anyway, Wilmington is a town. It's on the coast of North Carolina. It's on the Atlantic. And so it's got a couple of really popular beaches, Wrightsville Beach and Topsail Beach, that, lots of people go to. It's a place, I think it's very touristy. And it's really kind of a cute downtown. There's a river walk we walked on, lots of great restaurants, shops. There's a giant battleship that is permanently moored in the harbor there. So you can tour like a World War II battleship. And then outside of that, it's sort of like the suburbs, right? Your usual suburban sprawl. But it's really kind of a neat place. For North Carolina, right now, Wilmington is a pretty liberal place. I would say it's purple. In the last election, I think 50% voted Democratic, 48.5% voted Republican. So it's a purple place. But I think it's a place that's trying to be progressive now. Wilmington definitely has a lot of racist things in its history, but then so does Chapel Hill, so does Chicago. So does every place. So
Sure.
So then we went to the college, and UNC Wilmington is not that old. It was started in 1946. So, and it was first started as a community college. And so then, in 1961, they decided to make it like a little bit bigger. They started integrating the schools. It was sort of on the earlier side of some of the southern schools to integrate. And they started rebuilding the campus. And the one thing that I did not expect was how beautiful the campus would be. I had driven by it because you drive by it, from the highway on the way to the beach. But when you get in the campus, it's just really pretty. It's done in that red brick Southern style. And it's got really beautiful landscaping. It's flat, so everyone rents bikes or scooters or skateboards to get from place to place. And it looks just like a very beautiful traditional Southern college campus. And in fact, it's not just me that thinks that. It's a lot of Hollywood producers because the campus has been used for many TV shows as a set. And the most recent one that was filmed there is a show on Amazon Prime that I'm sure you don't know about, Mark, but many of
don't even
our
ask because
listeners
you know
and
the
their
answers
daughters
before you
do,
ask.
which is called The Summer I Turned Pretty. Both my girls made me watch that show. And I think it's on Amazon Prime, but they just filmed season 2 there because part of it's done at a college. And so the college starred as the college there. So it's just it's really beautiful. And they have a lot of really great academic programs that I think would be interesting to a lot of people.
Well, Lisa, I have a couple students that are like a long ways away that are considering it. One in like the Palo Alto area who's looking at marine biology. Another like Philadelphia one for their film program.
Yes. Well, those are two hot programs.
Yeah, like anytime you have someone willing to jump, zillions of schools geographically, that's usually a sign that there's something there pulling them in. And so those are two this year.
Yeah, it's a mid-sized university, so they have about 14,000 students there, and they call it the coastal, their coastal university, and they really do take advantage of that coastal location, and especially as your student has discovered in marine biology, they have one of the top marine biology programs in the country. They have, of course, we were on there was a lot of people there for the tour, but our tour guide did not present herself as what am I going to try to say? She sort of seemed like the dud tour guide. She actually wasn't, but she just gave a very brief kind of introduction. So all the people who were assigned to her just left and went with the other tours. But, I was like, whatever, so it was just, there's 3 families on our tour. And so actually, she was not the dud tour guide at all. And she took us all wherever we wanted to go. She took us there because she's like, can we go see the inside of that marine science building lab? I don't see why not. And off we went. So, so we got to see the inside of that, and it's amazing. And then they also have a coastal campus that is on the beach that is quite extensive. Apparently, UNC Wilmington is first dibs on whatever washes up on the beach. So whatever washes up on the beach, they get to go and get it and study it and dissect it or rescue it if it's still alive. They did mention that. And they also have a lot of really amazing study abroads that are very marine science focused. One of the ones that they were advertising in the marine science lab was an Alaska semester. So you go to Alaska, you're on a boat, you're studying whales and other seals and other, mammals. And it just sounded phenomenal, except for obviously, I imagine it's a little chilly. But other than that, I'm in with that. So, that is just a really phenomenal program. There was a young man who had been accepted there, and he was interested in marine biology, and you could just tell. I mean, everything they talked about, he just got more and more and more excited. So marine biology is a really amazing program there. Another one that you mentioned that is also, I think, really special is their cinema and film production program. And it's been very well respected for a long time, but because things just, get expensive, producers are always looking for cheaper places to film things. And so Wilmington is starting to become like the new Atlanta. They call it Wilmywood. And so there's all kinds of shows being shot there. And, just so there's all kinds of opportunities.
Let me say something. I'm happy to share the glory. When I first got here, it was really sort of like a novelty, like all of these films, And then after the nth time of like the road is closed down and you have to do this end route, like the novelty starts to wear off pretty fast. I'm surrounded, not immediately surrounded, but within 10 to 12 miles of me, there's some huge film studies in production. And so we're happy to share. I'm happy to share some of the limelight with North Carolina to avoid some traffic jams.
I remember when I was in Chicago in graduate school, we'd have to walk from Northwestern's medical school to our supervisors, and they were all in the loop. So it was like a mile and a half walk, and we had no time. We never had any time. So I remember I'm booking it, I'm running late, and there was this movie set, and they're like, you have to stop. And I was just like, I'm not stopping. And I walked right through the set, and there was Mel Gibson staring at me with his mouth wide open. It's like, why is he
your moment of fame?
Yeah. Well, no, I don't know. Or what is it? When you're nefarious? I don't know. There's another word for that. But yeah, I don't know. I was just like, I had no patience for that anymore because I was so sick of being stopped all the time on the streets of Chicago.
I hear you.
While they film something. So I get that. But, if you are a film student, there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's for there's a film department. I mean, it's pretty like well respected, and they graduate a fair number of students every year. It's one of the programs at UNC Wilmington that you have to apply to get into. So everyone who goes there, you get accepted to like their university college, and then you sort of have to take a film class or two, and your grades on that determine if you're admitted. I think they admit 120 in a class of film students a year. And I think you get to apply twice, and they have I think they want you to be able to do it if you want to do it, but it's not 100% guaranteed.
So I have a question about that. So is there no direct admit option? Like that could be stressful for people to base their whole thing, and then they get there and then they find out they're not getting in the program.
Yeah, and that's the same for nursing there too. They have a phenomenal nursing program, but it's not at this point direct admit. So you can apply up to 3 times, but not everyone who wants to is going to get into that nursing program. And I think that is a downside. Now, it sounds like, again, with the nursing program, they really will give you tutoring to try to, they'll let you take the class again that you need. I mean, they really do try to get as many kids in there as possible, but they just have limited resources. But I'm working with a student from Tennessee, and she was looking for more film schools to kind of add on that would fit in their budget. And this was like a no-brainer, but she was really reluctant to apply because it wasn't a sure thing. But for me, I feel like this is a top student with she has a great portfolio of work. I thought I wasn't worried about her getting into the film program. And so she did end up applying. But yeah, she definitely had that reaction.
Yeah, and I don't know why I said that, because I'm used to nursing programs. I'm more excited when I get the direct admits than the non-direct admit. That's more the norm. So I shouldn't expect film to be the same way. So there's so many programs that are that way. That's pretty common models actually. And and it sounds like they really give you a lot of chances to make it work.
Right. I mean, it's like, Chapman, for instance, like that film school, like Dodge Film School.
Sure.
I had a friend and her son didn't get directly admitted into it. And then, they were not going to admit him,
right?
When he applied again. It just they never
take
like anybody.
5% admit rate or something into that program.
He ended up transferring, and he went to UC Boulder, and he's extremely happy there. But yeah, and their business program is also, you have to apply, but that one, it's just known that you have to have a 2.7 college GPA to get in. So as long as you can do that, then you're admitted to the business program. All the other majors you don't have to apply for, you just declare.
I mean, and normally competitive programs are that way. Do you know what I mean? And that's it's pretty common for competitive programs to be that way.
Right.
You immediately see the appeal of the place. I mean, first of all, a lot of people are looking for that mid-sized school. There's not a lot of them. And there's such a difference when you're talking about 15,000 versus 35,000, 40,000, in terms of, and that has its place too. You get that with the Marylands and the Ohio States, the Arizona States, the Michigan States, the Purdue's, the big schools, but there's definitely a coziness with that mid-sized in terms of community, access to professors. And then, they're so close to the beach. That is really appealing. Like that cllose to the beach.
It's like 5 miles. It's like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
School you can bring a car to campus. Although I think you might have to, as a freshman, you get kind of the cruddy parking spots that are far away, but they have a bus that will just take you to the beach, as part of their bus transportation system.
The other thing too is that UNC schools, the whole UNC system, it's really an affordable out-of-state system compared to a lot of places. And that's something that I think sometimes people don't, I think people just group all out-of-states together cost-wise, but take a look at a bill from a Virginia, or a Michigan or the UCs, even places like Washington and Colorado. Like those are you're gonna be into the 60s for those places, cost of attendance, and then the UNC system has been a great system even for out of states. It's not quite Florida, but it doesn't have some of Florida's other issues.
Well, yeah, but I I know at UNC Chapel Hill, the Board of Regents just decided to start a new school of public policy and leadership. And the faculty is like, excuse me, we have never heard of this school. What do you want to do with this school? The bylaws of the university say that we pick the schools so I don't know. It seems like that seemed a little bit Ron DeSantis to me, but we'll see.
Well, I was thinking about, the Hannah Jones thing happened there.
And she's taking her her Ida B. Wells Society out. I mean, she's just done with us.
Morehouse College.
Sad.
Yeah, moving to Morehouse.
Done with us.
I was going to mention that on Monday's episode, but I was thinking maybe that was too inside baseball. Maybe people might not be interested. Yeah.
But anyway, just because you referenced the money, I will say that for out of state, it's probably going to run you $35,000 to $37,000, depending on your transportation costs. And for me, for like in-state, it's around $25,000. So that is a pretty decent deal, especially with some of the, phenomenal programs that are there. So I wanted to mention, so the other programs that are really big are biology, like exercise science, and like a track to going to, PT, OT, that kind of thing is really big. Education, environmental science, and they have a really phenomenal criminology program, and that's like another niche specialty that they have. So their criminal justice program is really excellent as well. And then in addition to that, they have a really nice honors college that some of the tour guides were involved with, and that they have their own living learning community. So they have their own dorm. And, they have it's like the typical honors college thing. You got the small class sizes. They have special classes that you can't take. Like our tour guide said she was not in the honors college, and she felt bad because she really wanted to take this class on conspiracy theories, but she couldn't. And I was like, well, maybe there's the conspiracy right there for you. But, that was one class that she felt like kind of deprived of that she couldn't take. They have a lot of research opportunities there as well. And then we walked by the honors college dorm, and I'm like, oh, so that's the honors college dorm. And I'm like, it's pretty big. She's like, oh, well, they put the honors students and all the athletes in the same building. And I'm like, that's like a really interesting combination. She's like, yeah, it is a really interesting combination.
Well, one thing, I'll never forget the first time I toured UGA. It was fascinating because they were so upfront about sort of the advantages that football players get right in the admissions process. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I remember them saying, listen, these guys bring multi-millions of dollars into our school, so they get some perks. And one of the things that they said was the football players and the honors college students, they get first choices of all classes. So I thought about that.
That's the other thing. Yeah, that's the same thing.
They have in common.
But at UNC Wilmington, there is no football. So you will not see football Seahawks, but they're
really into basketball, though.
They love it, and they're having a good season. And whenever they can beat UNC Chapel Hill, which I think they did earlier in the year, and I only know this because it's like blasted at me from every.
Yeah, I was about to say, Lisa, this is like me knowing like one of the top 10 movies out there.
Yeah, no, I do have to follow the UNC basketball season, whether I want to.
Is that because of Thomas or Alan? Who makes you do it?
No, it's just like. It's like
it's all around, so you just hear it everywhere.
It's just like I read the local paper. It's there. Sure, it's on my Facebook feed. Twitter is tweeting at me. I can't avoid that information.
So when you said follow, I was thinking it was like an active verb, like you were like
it follows
engaged.
Me.
Just yes, that's what you described.
I am being followed by them. Okay. I wish they would know, but they also have a really great beach volleyball team and the regular volleyball, of course. They have tennis, they have swimming, cross country, track and field, and soccer, and they are Division I, and they're in the Colonial Athletic Association, which I believe like Elon is in that association and some other Southern schools. We also
it goes up a little bit. It goes up a little bit up into the Mid-Atlantic.
I thank you for sharing that with me. I feel like now I know. We got to tour the gym because the guy who wanted to go into marine biology also really likes to work out. And so normally they just take you on a little lap of the place, but he's like, can I go see the weight room? Can I see the track? Can I see, so we went all around, their recplex, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it's really nice. They have a beautiful indoor swimming pool, track. I mean, all the weights you could ever want to lift, so much cardio equipment. They have all the classes, but it was spotless. And that's the other thing I would say about this campus. It was spotless. There was not a piece of garbage or like a blade of grass out of place.
Impressive.
And there were a lot of kids in there using the workout equipment. It was Saturday morning. I was surprised. So, yeah. And so they are really, they also have a really great veterans program because the Marine Camp Lejeune is in Jacksonville, which is right next to Wilmington. So a lot of military, after they leave, they have family there now. And so they have a really big building and a lot of services to help veterans make their transition. And they really value them as part of their student population because they feel like they add a lot of perspective and depth.
Friends, this completes the first half. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to take a break from the traditional higher ed updates. And I've got something really special for you. I think you're going to really love it. I'm full of surprises. So I'm not going to tell you what it is right now. But it's something that's really secretive and is rarely discussed. I doubt anybody has ever heard this before. The only people that might know this is if you have been not just in admissions, but upper level admissions, VP of enrollment, director, dean, that kind of thing. So you definitely want to tune in on Monday. I'm going to do that instead of our higher ed updates. And we also have a brand new interview. It's with Gloria and Terry Crawford. And they're the founders of Initial View. We'll talk about how Initial View helps students. By the way, if my voice sounds a little jacked up, I'm recording this from a hotel in Walla Walla, Washington, where I did not bring my professional podcast equipment. But friends, I can't leave without reminding you that college is not a prize to be won. It is a match to be made. And if you have to put that on your mirror, put that on your fridge, put that on your pocket, remind yourself of that over and over. It will help your sanity. See you Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.